Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lucinda. I'm the Business Development and Marketing Director with the Alford Group. Welcome to our session, which is titled How to Effectively Grow Revenue Through Corporate Partnerships in the COVID Era. Alexis Cooke will be moderating our event today. And before I turn things over to Alexis, I want to tell you a little bit about the Alford Group and walk you through some housekeeping items. So I realize that most of you on the line are very familiar with the Alford Group, but for those of you who may not be, a little bit about us. We're a national full-service consulting firm. We specialize in the nonprofit and social sectors. We offer services in fundraising, strategic planning, communications, crisis management, data analytics, and much more. Really, our goal is to provide the tools, the resources, the structure, to empower organizations to have the greatest impact possible. We are a member and a sponsor of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, both locally in many regions across the country and also at the national and international levels. We're a certified women's business enterprise, and we're an active member of the Giving Institute. If you want any more information about who we are and what we do, feel free to check out our website, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, simply alford.com. So just a few housekeeping items to kick us off today. Today's webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email later today or first thing in the morning with a link to the full recording as well as the full slide deck. So keep an eye out for that. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be prompted to complete a very short online survey. And it truly is short, it's 4 questions, and we would really appreciate your feedback. So please take the survey at the end of the event today. Everyone today is in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you have a question at any time throughout today's event, feel free to chat that to us, to the panelists. So to ask a question, if you mouse over the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A icon. If you click that, that will open a window, and there you can chat your question. That will come to the 4 of us, the panelists and the speakers today, and we will answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A at the end of today's session. Finally, we invite you to join us on Twitter. We will be tweeting with the hashtag corporate philanthropy, and our Twitter handle is @the_Alford_Group. We'll be live tweeting throughout today's event, and we invite you to join the conversation on Twitter as well. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Alexis to kick us off.
Hello, thank you, Lucinda. I am Alexis, a senior consultant for the Alford Group, and I have been with the firm for over a year and a half after 15 years in Chicago leading and supporting nonprofit development teams. Since joining the Alford Group, I have enjoyed opportunities to help clients increase potential and co-create business and mission impact through corporate partnership strategies. On behalf of my colleagues at the Alford Group, thank you again for joining us today for this webinar on an important and relevant topic. It is my privilege to welcome today's distinguished speakers. Dan Kowitz is a strategic partner of the Alford Group and the founder and CEO of JSC Partnership Consultants, a collaborative of experienced sponsorship professionals. Dan has 28 years of property, revenue acceleration, brand sponsorship strategy, client leadership, staff management, and business operations experience. Prior to founding JSC Partnership, Dan spent 12 years at IEG in Chicago, leveraging the resources of IEG's Client Solutions, Sponsorship Consulting, Valuation, and Research Services departments to best meet the needs of clients seeking IEG's trusted counsel, unparalleled insights, and ahead of the curve information. Thank you, Dan, for joining us.
You bet.
Nancy Wright serves as the Chief Executive Officer for Girl Scouts of Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana. Nancy embodies strategic and visionary leadership, and together with her dynamic and energized team works every day to empower girls to thrive in our rapidly changing world by providing access and opportunities that build their courage, confidence, and character. Currently, Girl Scouts of Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana serves over 82,000 girls and volunteers in 245 communities and is the 2nd largest council out of 112 councils nationwide. Nancy, thank you for joining us today. I know we all look forward to hearing about the strong work you and your team undertook to reconsider corporate partner opportunities and engagement strategies.
Thank you, Alexis.
So our agenda today will begin with Dan leading a discussion, beginning with learning objectives, ROI motivators, and current realities. Dan and Nancy will share 5 strategies for partnership transformation, and we will have time at the end for questions and answers. As a reminder, please use the Q&A function at any time to ask a question. I will be monitoring this throughout the presentation and will moderate the Q&A. We will hope to answer as many questions as time will allow. And do not forget to join us on Twitter, #CorporatePhilanthropy. So without further delay, Dan, please kick us off.
All right, thanks, Alexis. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I know it's been just an absolutely fabulous year for all of us, so I hope that this will give you some tips, techniques, and some comfort that there is opportunity out there. I also want to note that we have a very mixed audience today, very large audience. I think over 200 folks have come on, and a very mixed audience, nonprofits of all kinds, from causes to cultural institutions to associations. So we will try to make this applicable to everybody. Certainly all the concepts are, but I know, having worked at both a cultural institution and an association, there clearly are some differences. If you feel like you've got a question that's more specific to your type of organization, as Alexis said and Lucinda said, get it in the chat. We'll try to get to all those, and we'll also tell you about how we're going to answer all those post-webinar if we don't get to them. So let's start with some learning objectives. We're going to examine how to build an ROI-driven value proposition. In the year that we're having, ROI-driven is really important for anybody to spend with you. We'll explore, of course, virtual partnership benefits that truly drive ROI. A lot of folks are just trying to convert event stuff over to virtual, but when you do have to convert to virtual, what truly drives ROI? We'll look at a step-by-step revamped sales and outreach process. We are in a completely different environment. And so how do we do that now? And we'll determine and talk about the importance of collaborating with companies, not just selling to companies. There's a big difference between selling to and collaborating with. I think a lot of what you're going to hear today are things that have worked for quite a long time. And whether or not you can call anything COVID-proof, they certainly are things that we need to pay more attention to now in the current environment. Let's talk about just the industry for a minute. When you look at the industry of sponsorships and partnerships, and I've been at this almost 30 years, there is a big shift, particularly for all the type of organizations on the phone here today. If you want to generate new revenue and grow revenue, you want to get away from just getting $1,000 sponsors for your event, you got to move from selling visibility to selling behavior change. Companies who spend more and would or could spend more with you are looking to change the behavior of your institution's attendee or your association member or your nonprofit member and their stakeholder groups and families. They're really not interested in having you say, we'll put 10 more logos and 10 more spots. That's not what's going to get them to do it. The industry has had a huge shift. That doesn't mean that recognition goes away. But you've got to remember that when we're talking about ROI and mission-based, ultimately the goal of both yourselves, your organization, and your partners should be looking at changing behavior. Can these partnerships, the way they're formed, change behavior? We're going to come back to that a few different times today. We're also obviously all dealing with some pandemic realities. But what I'm finding is I'm out there with all of my clients and interviewing all of their sponsors, unless we're talking about airline or travel and tourism industry, they've been decimated. Clearly, there are some industries that are just not going to have sponsorship and partnership conversations right now. For a lot of those companies, marketing budgets have not been reduced. Companies have to meet sales goals for this year and for 2021. Companies also have missed the access to your members or guests or attendees. They're really looking to try and figure out, well, if I can't be in physical events and other activities, how can I network and get access to these folks? I still have an expectation to sell next year, so how am I going to do that? We're also in an environment, of course, this is human nature, companies want to help and companies want to be seen as helping, many of them right now. If you track even just the shift in advertising and what you're seeing on TV and those messages back from March before companies could change them to what we see now, talking about how we're keeping our employees safe and how we're helping an industry going and how we're helping those on the front lines. Companies want to help right now. But to do all these things, they need a different and deeper relationship. So how do we do that, and what is that all about? We've broken this down into sort of 5 strategies for partnership transformation. I'm going to share a brief bit of content and some of the basis of this, and I'm going to engage with Nancy and ask her some questions, and you can hear from her about how these things have been working for her organization. Certainly, as we go through this, remember to ask some questions if you feel like it's got a different application for your organization. All right, strategy number 1. In the times that we're in, I think you need to refocus your offerings on more meaningful benefits. In essence, that means move away from just logo and name recognition and throwing tickets at somebody for an event into some of these other things. We have to, if you're not already, start talking about and offering thought leadership, content creation socially and digitally, maybe collaboration on research, access and networking with your members. There are ways to figure that out virtually. Ownable events and programs. You know, what really stands out for companies that sponsor is I'm not just a logo on a wall like you see on the screen here. If there are parts of your organization that I can be seen as sort of presenting and making possible, that separates me from the clutter. Those are things that are still possible right now. Meaningful communication and recognition. We don't just need a logo on a webinar. We need to work with folks and talk to our partners and our members and our attendees about why they're here. Mailing list access doesn't mean just give them the list, but give folks, you know, access to your audience. Information and product showcase, use of marks and logos. There are a whole series of things that are a lot more than just about logo and name recognition. So I think in these times, we really need to move away from some of that. Sorry, user error, got to get the arrow back on there. Now, we're also obviously dealing with some COVID realities, right? So what does it mean? In this COVID world, it means we've had to transition everything to virtual, whether that's a cultural institution giving access to your exhibits and programs and other things virtually for people to experience, or associations moving a meeting from physical to virtual. We're all living in this world. What I've seen a lot of is organizations just taking all of their physical event benefits and saying, well, let's just move those logos over virtually. I'm not saying today that companies won't pay at all for that, but I don't think that's what we mean by meaningful. Virtual has certain advantages, but you got to do it right. Virtual can offer much more digital targeting, digitally and targeted content and marketing opportunities. It can provide through the data a more targeted reach. You can still work on ownable digital events and programs. If you're collecting the data right, you can get better data and information about attendees. One thing we hear quite often from companies these days is, you know, I'm not sure I need to reach the entire audience. I know who my business objectives are and who buys my product and service. Help me get at a portion of your audience. Well, now we have that data. Provide virtual networking meeting rooms. They don't just want to sponsor the coffee break with their name on it. They still want to be in and part of the conversation if you can make that happen. Education spots, virtual tools and resources, goodie boxes that go virtually to your attendees. You know, what you don't see on this list is just static recognition. You know, certainly virtually there are all kinds of things you can slap somebody's name on. But for meaningful partnerships and for true ROI growth, we have to look at new benefits for our organization. And of course, right now we have to make those work virtually. So Nancy, I've got a question for you related to all of this. You know, as your organization has recently gone through a process of relooking at all of this, how did you and your staff react to kind of shifting some of what you were offering into more meaningful benefits that you can now offer to partners and sponsors?
Well, Dan, you opened up a whole new world for us, because if you looked at where we started, we were in that visibility, small dot, as you showed on the screen, and we moved to more of a authentic, meaningful relationship with our funders. And what it gave us an opportunity to do was become more focused, and it benefited not only our partners in the funding relationship and the outcomes that they were searching for, but it also benefited our girls. So we went from a more of a reactive approach to a sponsorship to a proactive approach based on a framework that was created in collaboration with your team, and it made it for a more meaningful and cross-functional internal team that we could actually provide a holistic approach to working with our funder. A great example of that is we had a energy company that wanted to get more involved. Their women's leadership organization, internal organization, wanted to mentor young women so they would pursue careers in the energy field. And so it was a perfect way to bring funding in for girls to learn about STEM and also open their eyes for future career opportunities.
Yeah, and Nancy, and for everybody on the line here today, if you're listening to that answer, the example of the company you just gave, they didn't come in asking for just a bunch of logo recognition, right? You know, this wasn't just about please slap my names on things. There's a deeper discussion, which we're going to get to in a minute, but I think that's really important for folks to understand. One quick question I just saw in the Q&A, I'll answer it right here before we move along. Somebody asked about what do we mean about research collaboration. This may not apply to all of your organizations. I'm going to use an association as an example right now. You know, quite often within associations, they've been very leery about having sponsors and partners involved in research. One of the things that we find is if you focus the research around what keeps members up at night, what are their 5 biggest challenges right now, and you work with a partner and it's more industry related. We're kind of going into this together. We're trying to figure out how the industry is dealing with COVID. We could sort of go in on the research and figure it out together and then co-publish our findings so that the industry has gain. That's kind of what we're talking about here. If you're a cultural institution or somebody else, may not quite work the same, but I think there are creative ways to find where if we're talking about for the good of the industry, are there ways we can partner with companies on industry research that's good for members or consumers or any of our stakeholder groups. All right, get back to the arrow here. All right, strategy number 2. Create year-round, more robust and more ROI-driven partnerships. You know, clearly we're in a world where, and I'll talk about this in a second, you know, events and event-only sponsorship is just not happening right now. So you have to look to year-round, and they have to be more ROI-driven. Part of what does that mean is that we need to reserve some of the most valuable things for our high-level sponsors and partners. You know, we aren't looking to just kind of sell webinars as a one-off. You can do that. Somebody might pay for that. That's not going to drive a lot of ROI for you and or a company. We also need to look at what are the heart of year-round partnerships. We call those proprietary marketing platforms. You know, Nancy sort of just gave you an example, and she's probably going to talk about it again in a little bit here, where a company wanted to focus on STEM and educating girls. We aren't just selling partnerships as a piece of paper. There needs to be sort of a central mission to this. We call it a platform, and then you can take the conversation, the platform, if that's STEM for girls, you can make that come to life through events and campaigns and content and webinars and research. We shouldn't be looking at selling those things as one-off pieces. We should be looking at a central conversation and a marketing platform, making sure that fits for our organization and the partner, and framing an entire partnership around that. So whether that's things like social responsibility or ESG investing or being green and other ways to be socially conscious right now, and for every partner and every vertical, that could be different, but having a conversation around, you know, what are things that are important to both of us, and framing a year-round partnership around those things, using these other benefits as a way to make it to come to life, are the way that you really want to head. Signage, virtual booth space, tickets and registration, general recognition, we call these kind of just filler in the industry. It's not that you won't get somebody to pay $1,000 to have their logo slapped on something, but we're here today trying to focus on how do we drive more revenue, particularly, you know, in this pandemic era. Obviously, with the COVID realities, we're all having to shift from event only and in-person to year-round and virtual, but there are some things to kind of focus on there. Many companies, as I'm out talking to them, still say that they really didn't necessarily see ROI in event-only sponsorship. Could be cluttered, doesn't give them a sustained relationship, not always the most targeted audience, and can be expensive for companies. Companies market 365 days a year, and if you're offering them a 3-day event sponsorship, virtually or in person, you know, that doesn't really move the needle. If we're trying to get folks up from $1,000 into something larger, we have to really look at how we do this. And a lot of companies, as we talked about in the benefits just a minute ago, can benefit from the deeper data and diving into virtual in the right way. They can get to a more targeted audience. They can have a whole different conversation as long as you're willing to go in that direction. So Nancy, from your perspective, what do ROI-driven partnerships look like for Girl Scouts of Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana?
Well, we found some really key points that tee us up for success with our partners. One is, an example is a STEM company recently came to us and looked at their workforce pipeline and started realizing there's going to be a huge gap in the number of people that are going into their field of expertise in engineering. And they realized that women could fill that gap very easily. And so what we see there is that there's a need in society, and there's also a benefit in Girl Scouting that we have over 100 STEM badges. And so if you think about a target market and how this company can interact and start bringing their brand to the value of education to a girl, to their families, to the communities, and also create future employees. It also gives an opportunity in this case for the team members of that particular company to get involved. And they in turn are invested into this partnership, which deepens the partnerships in new and creative ways. And it gives them their own personal stories that they can tell and lift up within the organization. So what it does is it meets a societal need or a company or an organizational need. And at that same time, in Girl Scouts, we always say you can't be what you can't see. And it gives an opportunity for girls to be mentored by people in an industry that they may have an interest in. So it doesn't get any better. It deepens a relationship and builds at new opportunities that spans a longer time than just an event type sponsorship.
Right. What you're talking about there is that there are just so many aspects to what a deeper ROI-driven partnership looks like. This wasn't one of your events that was doing all those things you just mentioned, workforce development and educating girls, and we'll just slap a logo on it. You're talking about working with a partner where you both have this mission to do this and involving their employees and really getting both involved in the partnership. And that's what we mean by ROI-driven partnerships. This is where you can, as an organization, grow revenue. And you have to get to those deeper kind of partnerships. What a lot of folks do is they don't quite get that far. They say, we know this company probably is interested in that, but we have an event that already does it. Let's just ask them for $10,000 and put their name on it. We're not actually talking about how we both can be involved and have employees involved and do those kinds of things. So thank you, Nancy. I think that's a great way to look at and describe ROI-driven partnerships.
Dan, one of the things that I hear about from people that have been involved from a volunteer standpoint of organizations is they now have an emotional story that they can tell, and they feel like they've added value, which then creates employee satisfaction for that organization, and it changes the culture too.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because that changes the whole dynamic of the relationship now or the future partnership. When we can start to get partners and leaders and volunteers and staff of that company involved and feeling that emotional, that's something that's important to every single company. Those are reasons for them to continue on and grow this relationship. This isn't really a sales webinar, so we're not going to focus so much on how to keep, versus go out and get new partners today, a little bit, but not in great detail. But that's an important component. This is like any other relationship. I think that's where we're headed here, not just transactionally selling sponsorship off a piece of paper. All right. I know we've got some questions coming in. We'll try to get to some of them here shortly, but I want to move on to strategy number 3. Spend time researching not only your prospects, but also your current partners and sponsors. If you want to move away from smaller sponsorship to more ROI-driven partnerships, we have to spend some time putting ourselves in those companies' shoes. So what does the category look like if we're talking about finance or auto or beverage? Who are the brands that are coming and going and who's bought each other? Spending time looking at hot buttons and how folks market. It's always surprising to me when I have clients who, obviously want to grow their partner and revenue stream. And we're talking now about specific companies as targets. And maybe what they've done in the last year, the partnership or the organization selling sponsorship. And I say, hey, you know what? I'm just curious. Have you spent 15 or 30 minutes just even on the website of that prospect? And a lot of times they'll say, no, we haven't even done that. You know, in this digital age, there is so much information out there about any particular company, and I cannot stress this enough. I don't care what your package looks like. I don't care what you're selling, and to what company you're trying to do it. And whether you change any of that or not, this is an area that's super critical. Go spend 30 minutes on every website of any company you want to outreach to, and try to look at how they're marketing, how they're talking about things, what seems important to them and their employees, and frame your whole discussion with something that's going to resonate with them. You know, I'll get calls often that say, hey, Dan, can you just help us improve our deck? You know, I think if we had a better deck, we could sell more sponsorship. Well, whether you change anything in strategy number 1 or number 2, you can benefit yourselves in big ways by spending more time here in number 3. Learn about the company and talk to them in their language when you reach out. And it's really critical to do that for current partners and sponsors, not just because of what's going on in COVID, but you've always got to follow along with your partners. Don't wait for them to tell you. You know, right now, though, because of our COVID realities, lots of companies still have marketing and sales goals, as we've talked about, but operations and objectives have changed, whether they're your current sponsor or a prospect. You know, there have been huge shifted, obviously, consumer and member needs. This can lead to, if you handle it correctly, opportunities for new prospects. I have a client in the medical association field, and they've never had sort of non-endemic sponsors, companies who were sponsoring who aren't involved in pharma or device or whatever else it is. But because nurses are on the front lines of all this, one of the things that nurses have been dealing with is I can't get out and get food like I want to while I'm on shift, and I'm not home, so I can't get food to my families. So we were able to help them get a relationship with a food delivery company that would have never looked at this organization. So there can be new opportunities. I've heard from many companies that they're not traveling or participating in person in anything till Q3 or Q4 next year. So no matter what your plans are, you've got to understand where the company is coming from. How have their needs changed? How have their objectives and strategies changed? For many of them, if you just say, hey, we're not in person anymore, we've shifted to virtual, here's what can happen for you virtually, but you haven't taken the time to learn about what's changed for them, they're not going to come on board. They're going to say, well, that still doesn't really fit. Let's have a conversation and let's really get into that. So Nancy, you know, as you have sort of started to revamp what you guys are doing, you know, what value do you think increasing your staff's time, the amount of time they put into research and learning about prospects, you know, how do you think that has helped you in some of your current dialogues?
So we've been investigating through the website and any other information, market analysis, that we can get to know the organization well. And what it does is it helps us all get on the same page, because there are many people in this process with us now, instead of it being one-dimensional like it was before until we started working with you. And it allows us to prepare a list of questions. So more importantly than when we go into these relationships with a potential funder or a current funder, we want to listen, because as we listen, we learn a little bit more about how we need to bring these ideas to life for them and what this partnership can be. And we've prepared in advance all the different options that we think might fit into their agenda or their objectives. But sometimes what we discover along the way, what we thought was going to be the right connection for them, when we listen very closely, it may start out that way, but as we co-create and talk through the different options of what Girl Scouts can bring to this scenario and what they're looking for, we then co-create something that's more meaningful, and their buy-in is there. And you know, Dan, you know, when you were talking about how things are shifting, it reminded me of a recent conversation we had with a funder who's been a funder of ours and a partner of ours for a while. And one of the pain points that they're experiencing right now in COVID is that all their parents are overloaded, and their young girls are looking for new outlets for fun, engagement, and a social platform, and that they feel comfortable with, and that there's acceptance and safety. So Girl Scouts is a community of girls, and there's socialization and there's fun activities. And so we never thought about that and dealing with that from a parent standpoint. And now we're a value add to that relationship than just the work we were originally doing with them. So you never know where it's going to go.
Yeah, exactly. And the key point in all of that is, you know, this just wasn't a piece of paper you were sending them. You're having dialogue, right? You're trying to understand them, and we're going to talk about that more here in just a second. You know, we both need to sort of learn about how this is all affecting us right now. You cannot just presume that it's about your organization and what has shifted for you, and how can I take whatever I've sold before in sponsorship or partnership and just move it virtually and go down that path. We have to take some time right now to figure out what's changed on the corporate side and where we can find some new synergies. You know, whether or not that company would have answered that question the same a year ago, you know, parents and they don't have anything, they need help with all the things going on with kids at home and their girls and the time for them to do things. Who knows? But right now, that's what's happening. So you've got to engage and learn about them is really the key point here. I'm going to take one other little quick question now I saw pop in because we don't have a huge section on it today. Somebody asked, you know, how do you establish the value of an ROI-driven partnership, especially as we shift virtually? I'm sure and guess what you mean by that is price, right? If I used to ask X, Y, or Z for a partnership, and now my institution isn't open or my event has gone virtual, how do we shift the price? And what is the right price? There's no one magic answer, but let me give you a few tips. I don't think, especially now that we're quite a long ways away from March, we're guiding folks away from just shifting to pandemic pricing. You do not have to automatically presume that you should ask less right now. You have to be smart about what verticals you go after. I don't think airlines are going to spend on sponsorship right now. But quite frankly, we're seeing some events have a huge increase in attendance because they've gone virtual. And or if you think about the benefits I talked about earlier, if you're smart about what you do virtually, there can be better data, there can be deeper conversation, there can be more focus on content. One of the things we talk about all the time right now is if you are a live event, you should think more about how we get content involved and let it live virtually with our sponsors, because we don't live in just a live world anymore pre-COVID. So I think that, you know, you have to look at, are we driving more value, kind of keep your prices the same. Now, eventually, you and your partner might have to talk about, well, what happens if? You know, that was a 10,000 person event. What happens if only 5,000 people come virtually, and will numbers shift? Well, maybe we have to agree that we'll look at that when it happens, but because maybe some other things would be more valuable to them. So no automatic one answer and one formula on how do we convert it over to virtual, the fee and the price anyway. All right, strategy number 4, effectively sell partnerships. And I put the word sell in here in quotes because we guide sort of against selling. You have to have a mindset that you're providing solutions, not selling sponsorship or partnership. Selling implies, I always get sort of a car dealer lot in my mind. You know, they're all over you and they're just telling you all about the benefits and features, and they don't ask you any questions. They have no idea why you're there that day or what's important to you and your family. We don't coach selling sponsorship, we coach providing solutions. And when you do that and you think about trying to grow revenue and going after larger relationships, we also think about a first goal is really only getting a meeting. When I said earlier that we get calls where people say, hey, could you just help us improve our deck? You're not going to really grow sponsorship and partnership just because you have a better deck and you send it out to more people. If your goal is to help a company with a solution, we've got to get a meeting and we have to sit and talk together. So what we do is we take our research, we learn about them, we send them a note that is about them. How can we help you accomplish an objective where both of us can meet this mission? If that sounds good, let's set up a call and let's talk. If we get into a relationship and a conversation, we do more question asking and listening than we do pitching. I will never show up at meeting number 1 with a huge deck showing them all about our sponsorship and our partnership offerings. I mean, if they ask for that, because some are very aggressive and say, well, don't you have something you can show me? Say, well, we have lots of different ways we can get involved, but I think we need to get to a place where we feel like it works for both of us. Ask them about what their sponsorships in general look like, how they do it with other organizations. We will sit with our teams and create lists of questions that we could ask in a meeting just so we're prepared. So you're not selling, you're providing solutions, you're trying to get a meeting, you're trying to discover and have them self-discover what partnership value looks like. What you're ultimately trying to get to is that this is a company who feels like, hey, you know what, because we're in a conversation, we believe in the value proposition, we believe we've collaborated with you on that, And that's of value to us. So back to that pricing question, whether or not virtual is worth more or less, if they feel like they've created this relationship with you, they're going to pay a lot more than they probably thought that they would. One of the other little tricks is we call it finding their pain. Nancy, you mentioned this earlier from the company who's involved and needed to be involved with STEM and workforce development, particular to girls. That company knows that that's an area where they are weak in. That they're not getting involved in the partnership or the sponsorship just because you sent them a piece of paper with a bunch of benefits and a fee. They're feeling like, wow, if we do this, it's going to help us solve a challenge and it's going to meet both of our missions. That's a pain that we have. So we're providing solutions, we're not selling. The COVID realities in all of this is we are all in this together, right? Although we seem so politically divided, I think when I'm out there talking about sponsorships and partnerships, I am finding so many companies who are so much more open to just having the dialogue. You don't have to have your full offer all buttoned up. We're talking partnership, not philanthropy here today. And they want to engage. They want to talk about what's going on with them and what would work. I just mentioned this a few minutes ago in answering the questions, but we don't have to offer pandemic pricing. Some companies' spending has increased. If they're not traveling and they're not spending on exhibits, but their sales goals haven't changed, some of them have actually even more for sponsorship. But to spend it, they have to feel like the value is there. They want to know that you understand their unique situations. Many of them want to be seen as helping during this time. And I think for us, we have to be open to new and different collaborations with partners. We are all in this together. Maybe there are ways that we can figure it out together. And there's something in that right now that's of great value to everybody. So Nancy, maybe if you can take a minute and describe, as you've been sort of evolving how your organization takes partnership to the marketplace, how has that transformation affected your staffing and sales process? So how have you changed from a staffing and sales process, organization?
Yeah, it's strengthened our organization, but the structure is very different than when we started, what was it, almost a year ago. So it was pre-COVID when we started working with you, Dan. And what we realized is that we had been very siloed in our approach in looking at sponsorship versus looking at the opportunities in a broader perspective. And there were people within our organization, especially our program staff, that brings programs to girls, and understanding what our funders and our partners wanted. They wanted more interaction with the girls. They wanted to have impact and show the impact for the future. And so what we found is that we shifted and put more resources in this area. There was more cross collaboration between different departments. And we also realized that this was an investment time for us. And what else do we need to do from a talent development to ensure that people have the skills to understand all the dimensions you were just talking about, and what skills that they needed to either advance or change in order to think of this with this new mindset.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Nancy. And I just saw a question that's sort of related. What happens if your staffs have been reduced? I know for many organizations, you are in a time period where you're dealing with just not having enough staff. And the question was, how do we prioritize? From my perspective, I always like to look at a sponsorship and partnership funnel and split it into thirds. You've got a third at the bottom who buy very small deals and they're very transactional. You've got a third at the top who are all of these much larger potential relationships, and in the middle is sort of everybody else. If you have less staff and you have to prioritize, I think that you take the bottom, you keep it transactional. If you want to ship a bunch of $1,000 requests out to a bunch of companies and see what happens, great. You prioritize your time with limited staff on the top. And if you're doing your research and you're really focused in on the right prospects for the right reasons and trying to understand them, you try to get some key, deep conversations going. Clearly you don't have the time to do maybe as massive amount of outreach as you had before, but you got to focus your time on knowing the prospects and reaching out to the right ones.
Yeah, and
all right, strategy.
In our case, Dan,
go ahead, Nancy.
What we did is we shifted, because our programs went virtual and they weren't in person. We took one of our programs people that really knew the heart of a lot of our content that would relate to STEM or all these companies and where they wanted to make a difference. And we took her expertise and helped augment our sponsorship team. And it's added more power to that experience.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, not everybody on the phone here is the leader in their organization, but I think if you can take that back, obviously the leaders of any organization right now are trying to figure out, well, where are we doing less and where do we need more, especially if you're reducing staff, sizes. So not an easy time for any of us. All right, finally, strategy number 5. Service like an agency, we call it. This has always been important, and I think it's even more important. If you've done the first 4 strategies successfully, now you're going to maybe come into a new world where you have some new partnerships. And to get there, you've probably had deeper and different conversations. And now this is going to be a partner who expects that sort of deeper level of relationship and conversation to continue. So what does service like an agency mean? It means that we should be thinking like them. We should be helping them market better. We should be talking more about success in advance and during the relationship. If their goals and objectives have changed, how can we help them meet those and what needs to change about the relationship? Maybe we should be not only having one-on-one conversations, but surveying our partners, finding out what's happening, what's working for them, what isn't. So many organizations are afraid, especially when we have a big shift like we're in right now, to go ask anybody, well, did that work? Well, what if they tell me it didn't work and they'll never come back as a partner? I think in general, we would all say that's not the way to have the best kind of relationship. Our sort of perspective on that is if we ask and we talk about it, we have a chance to fix it. So if we went virtual and we both agreed to try some new things virtually, let's talk about which ones worked, which ones didn't, what other new ideas we have, and how can we focus on the ones that we think would be better. If you're going to have deeper conversations to get there, you have to have deeper conversations, while you're in the relationship as well. Finally, one of our other COVID realities, and we've talked about a little bit of this today, is that, the corporate goals and objectives have shifted and may shift on a weekly and monthly basis. So even if you've discussed ROI and measurement ahead of the deal, let's rediscuss that. Let's talk about that on a monthly basis and make sure that if your organization has suddenly shifted and said we can go back to being physical in February, let's talk about that. We have to be sensitive and cooperative with the shifting corporate needs as well, not only our own. We can talk to partners about what can we do differently in these times. Having these conversations with partners doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do everything that they ask. It's about the dialogue, and it's about making them feel like you're trying to sort of fit what works for them, as well as your organization. Keep in more regular contact and include partners in your strategic planning. If you've had a long-time partner who's there with you annually and involved in your biggest event, and you're thinking about all of the shifts in the silo, but you just want them to come back, maybe we're missing a component. Not that we can do anything that they're asking about, but maybe we can say, hey, can we have a brainstorm call? We're talking about how to shift this, but we're interested in what you think would work if you're to remain on as a partner and a sponsor. So let's get into some live dialogue with our partners. All right, Nancy, one more question here. As you look to growing your partnership program in the future, how critical do you think servicing and defining success is to not only gaining the partner, but keeping the partner?
Well, understanding mutual goals is essential, especially as everybody's priorities, Dan, as you just said, are shifting. And what we're also seeing is there are new people entering our partnerships that we've had for a long time. Because one, we're having more access, interestingly, to some of the upper management that we might not have had a chance to get to, and their priorities and what they think their priorities are now are shifting. So we have new clients sometimes entering into that partnership. But it is important to continue to go on this journey with them. It's not, here's the program and it's final. It is a process, and as you continue to do that, they then will invest in future opportunities and take more risk and opportunity with you, which means more revenue down the road. They're willing to invest in something new and innovative and want to be a part of that because they've been on this success in the past with you.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, if we started out with a couple of strategies that are around what types of benefits and how do you put it together. The last three areas talked about learning more about the company, having your staff approach the companies differently, and then servicing the companies differently. That was three sections that we covered versus the first two. No matter what you're selling or what you change in what you're selling and what you're offering, learning about the companies in a different way, coaching your staff and you to go out and try to talk to these companies in a different way. And then when you have the relationships, continuing that model and having deeper dialogues and deeper discussions, those are all things that can advance your revenue greatly, even if you don't change the first two. So I know for the group, we've got a bunch of questions coming in. I have just a couple more that I've thought of for Nancy, and then that should leave us a good 10 minutes to answer as many questions as we can from the Q&A. Nancy, especially as we've gone through this difficult year, and all of the shifting that you've made, as you noted, we started, sort of working with you before COVID hit. We've continued on. You've been doing a lot in your organization. So overall, what role has this process that you're going through played in your greater organizational transformation?
Actually, it's strengthened our approach both to get through COVID, interestingly enough, unexpectedly, as well as thinking, because you and I are working on a project right now, a potential partner right now, and it's given us an opportunity to get our sea legs, so to speak, and practice some of these techniques in a more thoughtful way with a lot of different people available from that potential partnership that we probably would not have had access to if it was a normal year. So it's been a great process to try this during COVID. And it's helped us figure out how we monetize our brand at Girl Scouts. There's a lot of people that approach us all the time saying, we want to partner with Girl Scouts because of the great solid brand that we have. We have to be thoughtful about what does that look like? And is that a partnership that enhances and elevates our brand? And we've talked a lot about that with you, Dan, as well. And so you've brought a structure that allows us to be creative within a structure that is defined that we feel comfortable in. So we're excited about getting on the other side of this. So I've watched my team kind of go from frustration or potential frustration during this time to a time of innovation, energy, and hope. And I would have never expected that, quite frankly, during COVID.
Well, right. And none of us expected COVID at all. So, hope and energy, I'm sure, is something we all need right now. To that end, and with all that we're dealing with, what's your sort of vision for the future? How are you feeling about the future of Girl Scouts of Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana sponsorship and partnership, even with all that's going on?
Well, I see so many needs within the potential partners that we're talking and our current partners. I just see it getting better, and our partnerships getting deeper, and authentic value back to our partners in ways that we didn't expect initially. And whether it's a brand new partnership that we're exploring or one that we've been involved in years, it just continues to evolve and deepen because people want to make a difference and they want to contribute and be a part of the solution. So that's the great news.
Right. Yeah, and I really think that's the key. Not everybody's going to say yes, but if we're trying to pick a series of companies who we can have a conversation with and figure out some of these challenges together, that's where people all want to dig in right now. And maybe this will shift again here in a year or two, but I really do think that the opportunity is out there. All right, Alexis, I think you were going to come in, but I'm sort of scanning here through Q&A. So I'd love to dive us into live Q&A.
There's so much. I would love to just dive right into. So a question just right off the bat that struck me to get us started here is, could you just talk very quickly about the difference between marketing dollars and philanthropic dollars?
Yeah, you bet. Today, and I didn't do that at the outset, one way to look at it is what we're talking about here today prepares you to sit with the CMO of a company versus the leader of the foundation of a company. When we're talking about sponsorships and partnerships, We generally aren't going out and asking for a capital campaign gift or a gift from the foundation of a company. We're talking with the CMO or any of the staff that filter down under CMO, and they have marketing goals and objectives. Their side of the house, essentially, is to grow whatever their business is. As nonprofits, we want to make sure that if it's marketing oriented, it's still going to fit our mission and not be over commercial. So all of the sponsorship and partnership speak today is really aimed at helping you when you're sitting with the marketing side of a company and thinking like that side of the house is thinking versus the foundation.
Great. Speaking of finding the connectivity between the mission of your organization and the company objectives and priorities, I'm going to put a bunch of questions together here. Can you speak a little bit about forming and growing relationships in this virtual environment? How can you, in a virtual meeting or in a virtual platform, draw out company needs and pain points? What should you be doing to prepare for that meeting? And how can you support volunteer and or mentoring engagement opportunities in virtual environments?
So let's start with Nancy, Nancy, I'm thinking of when I answer this question, so I'll pull you in here. I'm thinking about, the company that you've referenced several times today. I'm going to start with, how do you develop this relationship virtually? I think it's interesting because right now we are all operating in this Zoom environment, right? And whether we're getting tired of it or not, I think that we're finding that if you have the right approach, again, you're thinking like the company. It's apparent to them that there's a mission match between the two organizations. I don't really find too much difference between asking if we can schedule a personal meeting versus a virtual. If they're going to take it, they're going to take it one way or another. And in the virtual environment, being able to ask a lot of questions and listen and engage, I haven't found to be, so other than my kids, trying to run in while I'm on stuff, to be so different. There's nothing there. As long as you're prepared to think like them, ask questions about how their business is going, how they're looking at sponsorships and partnerships right now, what's working for them, what's not working for them, that's one of the really critical things to pulling out pain. Nancy, I think that's what we're learning with the partner that you were alluding to. There are some things that are not working for them. And when we created a series of questions to really draw that out, and they finally kind of said, yeah, we need some help in that area. Now we're on to something. Is that how you felt, Nancy?
I did feel that way, yeah. And we could draw that out, and we had multiple people on the screen, so we could hear different people have different perspectives. So we need to listen to all of them, and they paint a broader picture for us to understand what are the variety of pain points, and we could hear that. The other thing, Dan, you and I were talking about earlier before everybody got on, is what the Zoom world has given us an opportunity to see is a more authentic self of the people that we're talking with, because we're all in our homes. We all can look in the background. I can look at your your screen right now, and I can see your picture in background. It tells me a little bit more about you, and we get to know the person. And people seem to have a little bit more time and a little bit more relaxed with some of the top executives that we've dealt with than in the past, or we're getting to know them at a deeper level in a more personal way, which helps us form a deeper relationship. It's all about the relationship.
Right. We're all human beings. 2 years ago, I feel like maybe we weren't all human beings. And, if you're some big CMO of some big company and you're just some little nonprofit and they're not giving you the time of day. Well, now we're all in this pandemic. So we're all together in this. Alexis, your second part of your question, I'm going to aim at Nancy, and I saw this one online. And I think that was more around, how do you handle volunteerism opportunities for corporate employees virtually? So Nancy, on your end, as you guys have had to transform volunteers who come from companies and want to help, but now you're doing everything virtually. How's that going, or how do you envision that going?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're getting access to a wider range of volunteers now because people are traveling less and they're looking for meaning in their life. There's a difference between success and significance. They're looking for significance. They've got the success maybe in their career, but they want to know that they're making a difference. So we have a lot of volunteers that are coming forward that have time now virtually to contribute to a program. And we're, using Zoom, we're using, the breakout rooms, and we're creating relationships and mentoring opportunities for our girls working with a variety of different people and industries. So it is working surprisingly well. And if you would ask me a year ago, I would have said, no way, but we're actually expanding our visibility as an organization and engaging more people, both girls and mentors and families, because the families are now sitting in on the programs and not just the girls. So who knew?
That's great, Nancy.
Yeah.
That's really good to hear. Dan, could you provide some examples for ROI-driven engagement strategies if you do not have a volunteer opportunity or perhaps aren't in direct services, so there isn't an obvious path for that form of mentoring or volunteering?
Yeah, I mean, I think that mentoring and volunteering is just one small piece of what ROI can mean from a company. Remember, we know at the end of the day, any sponsorship or partnership has to fit the mission of your organization. But for you as sponsorship and revenue generating professionals, on certain points on certain days, you have to suspend that. You're not going to go against it, but suspend it and think like the company. And if you think about the company and what might drive ROI for them, that could be all those other things we talked about earlier and depends on the type of the company. That could be workforce development. Doesn't have to be virtual volunteerism. That could be STEM and helping through live webinars to educate the girls. That could be, and Girl Scouts in this case, that could be, good for green or social justice or all kinds of other things. If we think about, what's the end game for this company? What are they here to do, and why do we even see a link with the audience? And if I were them, what would I think would be ROI? And let's talk about that with them. It's okay. I'm seeing something else that says, how do you get at an organization's pain? All of these things come through questions. The reason we want to do research is we want to put something out there to get that first meeting that is about the company. Hey, company, we see you doing X. Nancy, we recently did this, I think, with Nike. I saw them marketing in a certain way and felt like that would be a great link with Girl Scouts. We did not write Nike and say, hey, I think you need help in this area, or we can offer you this great thing. We said, hey, Nike, we love that message that you just put out. And we think that message and our mission are very synergistic. And we'd love to have a conversation around that. And they responded right away, and we're working on setting up meetings. And Nike is a tough get, and this won't be, a huge sports sponsorship. So sometimes it's not even about their pain, and what ROI can mean to a company. It just goes down so many different rabbit holes. It isn't just about volunteerism. Other questions, Alexis? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, on the note of relationship building, would you speak a little bit, and this is for both of you, how do you determine who you should involve in those meetings? Staff, the team structure, but also your board or other volunteer leaders who may have connection points?
Nancy, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, well, again, we start with the research and try to understand who the individual is and why they wanted to connect with us. And they usually tee that up for us. And if it comes to going on LinkedIn to see if they're linked in to any of our board members or people that we are affiliated with, so we can have a better understanding who they are and do research that way as well. And then based on the objectives and what we learn through that process, because people usually set some type of guidelines for the meeting, we then put together one or two people, ask who's going to be involved on their end, so we understand who they are, their titles, and then we try to match level to level for exactly, and educational content or goals and objectives that we think may align with other people in our organization. So it's a very thoughtful process. It's not just me. It's who brings the best resource for that funder and for that potential partner based on what we know at that moment. And then we move people in and out depending on their needs.
Yeah, and Nancy, I want to pick up on a couple of things there. Matching person for person, you don't want to overwhelm them. So if they've got one person coming to the first meeting, you don't need 10. And I know there can be lots of back and forth in your organization about whose relationship it is and who should be there. You don't want to overwhelm them. And I think that was a great strategy, Nancy, to eventually, as they grow the people on their side and you grow the people on your side, sort of, match the levels and all of those kinds of things. Very helpful.
So I have to be the one to say we're at time. This was too much fun for me. I want to thank you again, Dan and Nancy, for this insightful and relevant conversation. And I want to thank everyone for a really robust and energized question and answer session. So thank you for your participation. Lucinda?
Yes, thank you, Alexis, Dan, and Nancy, for such a great presentation and conversation. Lots of questions and lots of dialogue, which is wonderful. I just want to wrap us up. So I have a couple of announcements and a few reminders before we conclude today. Our first announcement is our next webinar. So our next webinar is going to be in October, and it's titled Tomorrow's New Normal, Strategies for an Action-Forward Approach to Planning. So similar to what we've been talking about today, things are different, and how do you approach planning for the future when there's a lot of uncertainty? There's a lot that we do know, and so in this webinar, we're going to share with you what we're recommending to our clients and have a panel of experts talk about how they are approaching planning for the future. So details to come on that. Keep an eye out for more information from the Alford Group. And then just a few reminders. So first of all, you'll get an email from us with the full recording and the full slide deck from today's presentation. So keep an eye out for that as well. As soon as we conclude here in just a moment, you will be prompted to complete a very short online survey. So please take 3 minutes and complete the survey. It truly is short. We'd love to hear from you, and we would love your feedback. If we did not have a chance to answer your question today, please contact us. Our email is here on the screen. It's info@alford.com. We would love your questions, comments, ideas. We want to continue this conversation, so we'd love to hear from you. And then finally, we have the direct link to our COVID-19 resources toolkit here on the screen as well. So that is another resource for all of you to check out on our website. So with that, I will wrap us up and conclude today's webinar. I hope that everyone has a really, really great day, and we will now disconnect. Thank you so much, and take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great day. Thank you.